It should
way
have
to
been 12
approach.
songs and not 12 chapters.
Yeah, Julian 12 songs.
Yeah.
But that seems pretentious.
I mean, is he not a little bit?
He is.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Cannes Canon, where we look at Cannes competition filmmakers' previous films to better understand their work. And today we are going to start with a filmmaker that is getting a lot of press and has quite the interesting track record.
Jafar Panahi is a renegade, a punk, a rebel, and he's one of the few old masters in this year's competition. Panahi got his start as a member of the Iranian new wave of cinema, alongside Abbas Kiarostami, working as his assistant and first AD on set. But his debut came in 1995 with The White Balloon, which was the Camera d'Or winner at the Cannes Film Festival that year. And that was a film written by his mentor, Abbas Kiarostami, and is a very similar piece of work to Kiarostami's own breakthrough film, Where is the Friend's House? And while his career started in this very child-friendly, playful mode, Panahi very quickly started to dip into challenging cinema that directly confronted the crimes of the Iranian regime. In the year 2000, he won the Golden Lion at the Venice Film Festival for his film The Circle, which directly challenged the way that the Iranian government treats women in society. And after that, he touched on mental health and the class system with his 2003 film Crimson Gold. And in 2006, he filmed a movie during one of the World Cup qualifiers to criticize the way that the government has put rules in place to keep women from attending sports events. He has always made provocative cinema, and that's why in 2010, Panahi was among a group of about 15 artists, which also include Mohammad Rasulov, who were sentenced to jail for propaganda against the regime. And alongside his arrest, Panahi was given a 20-year ban from filmmaking. And yet, since his arrest in 2010, Jafar Panahi has made 6 feature films, including a Golden Bear winning film with Taxi in 2015, and after that his promotion to the Cannes Film Festival competition, premiering 3 Faces there in 2018, and now this year he's returned with It Was Just an Accident, competing for the 2nd time. Jafar Panahi is one of a very rare group of filmmakers with 2 out of 3 of the Triple Crown of European film festivals. He has his 2000 Venice Golden Lion for The Circle, his 2015 Berlin Golden Bear for Taxi, and now could we see a 2025 Palme d'Or for It Was Just an Accident?
I mean, people have speculated that Juliette Binoche, having been in an Abbas Kiarostami film in the past certified copy, she might be, dare I say, biased towards Panahi.
And also worth noting, Juliette Binoche was one of the 5 people who brought his petition to release him to international attention. Ever since 2010, at least, she has been a massive supporter of his works.
It does feel like all the stars are aligning for that to happen in a sense. And something that I think is really interesting about his cinema, he doesn't just purely take it as narrative cinema. Cinema has been used for political means throughout history, whether it's the propaganda during the Nazi regime or propaganda during the current Islamic regime in Iran. And Jafar Panahi wants to challenge what a film can be, what kind of stories can be told in order to challenge the power of film.
I would say Iranian cinema is such a rich cinema precisely because of the repression installed by this regime. In the late 80s, early 90s, the Iranian New Wave were looking at all of the propaganda crap and basically thinking, what can we do differently? What can our cinema say that is not what the regime wants us to say? And it's not all directly politically challenging. All great Iranian filmmakers challenge the idea of what cinema is. Panahi is a great example of this because his films are not just films. They are reflections of his life. He looks at cinema not as a lens to look at the world through, but as a mirror to see the world reflected back in. His movies cannot be watched in a bubble. You have to understand the context around them. Through his career, he's had three different phases. At first, his films for children, which is The White Balloon and The Mirror, which are about and for children. I think children would be pretty bored watching them, but they are children's movies in the vein of Where's the Friend's House? Yeah. And then he switches very deliberately into this political cinema, which is embodied through The Circle, through Crimson Gold, through Offside. And then we get those sort of quasi-documentaries that come after his arrest. Him as a character, how much of it is real, how much of it is fake. The last thing I'll just say is I have struggled a little bit with Panahi because I think he's one of the most interesting filmmakers in the world right now, but like I was saying earlier, his work demands context, and I often find that his movies are more fascinating to think about than they are to actually watch. I haven't fallen head over heels in love with a Panahi film yet.
So why don't we dive into the film that we've chosen for the parallel, which is Crimson Gold, the 2003 Un Certain Regard winning film.
This is a story about a man on the brink. I would say it kind of follows in the tradition of stuff like Falling Down, Taxi Driver, dipping his toes into the world of crime to hopefully provide a better life for himself. And yet he finds at every possible opportunity to get better, to climb up the ladder, he's met with resistance. And the film begins and ends the same way, with this man robbing a jewelry store and taking his own life. So we're told from the very beginning of the film what is going to happen. Yeah. There's no happy ending for this man.
The film starts with the end. You start with this kind of static, stable tripod shot of the jewelry store with the front door in the middle of the composition. You start halfway through the robbery, and the film comes back to that shot, that same composition, and the place where it ends is exactly where it starts. So that scene loops on itself, and it's only after that scene and after him taking his own life that we cut back to the past to see what led to this.
Like I've said before, this is a film where I think the circumstances around the film I find to be more interesting than the film itself. The character is meant to be schizophrenic, is meant to be struggling with mental health, but the actor that they cast in the role was also paranoid schizophrenic and was dealing with a lot of episodes and dealing with a lot of mental health struggles while on set, which led to a lot of production issues and led to what I think is a pretty phenomenal performance. It's raw and it's real, and that's because it really is real.
I don't think he is a professional actor. I don't think he's acted before or since, but you know, that performance is incredible. And part of it is thanks to the casting. And I don't mean casting as a paranoid schizophrenic.
The look of him is so perfect.
That's what I mean. His shape, the way he feels like he embodies this body, the way he moves around, the way he places himself on his motorcycle. There is something really like tangible about like how he is struggling. You know, there's a scene early on in the film where he has to deliver a pizza. It's his job. He presses the buzzer, and the person on the other end says, "Hey, I'm sorry, can you just go up to the 4th floor? I can't go out of my apartment right now." And so you're going to see this man, this very obese man, will have to walk up these stairs, and you can all the way to the 4th floor as the camera kind of slowly tilts up. And it's pretty like fascinating to see.
A large part of this movie is the way that this man takes up space in society, and he's a very tall guy, and yet he's being looked down on at all circumstances. Anytime he meets someone, I mean, one of the best scenes in the movie, in my opinion, is when he tries to enter into the jewelry store, and he's dressed in a nice suit, and you know, he's put himself together a little bit, and he's scorned and told, "You can't come in. We don't accept people like you in here."
It's done in a very kind of backwards way, in a very kind of manipulative way. It tells him like, "Oh, you know, like if you're looking for this kind of thing, you really need to go to these stores over there."
As he's holding the door shut. He's not allowed to take up any space whatsoever in society. He's forced to shrink himself because that's the way that society and the class system operates.
And there's something about his acting being completely worn out. It feels like he has the same facial expression throughout most of the film. And sure, he's going to kind of look around, but he's very quiet. He's going to say things very matter-of-factly. There's this kind of dissatisfaction that you feel through his face that I think communicates this kind of class struggle aspect of the film very, very strongly.
And it's a very provocative film that I can see why the Iranian government had a problem with a film like this, because it speaks very frankly about how unfair this whole system is. Toiling and toiling, and then being told, sorry, you're still not good enough. You don't fit in with us. You can't join the club. And Panahi's angry about this. There's a lot of great moments here that I will definitely be thinking about and wanting to revisit.
I mean, the last, like, what is it, 15, 20 minutes? Where you actually like see him go into a rich person's home and kind of observe things here and there.
For the first time, he's kind of like given that space, right? The guy invites him in and says, oh, you know, make yourself at home a little bit.
What is it like to be there? What is it like to wash your face in the bathroom when you're in this kind of a home? What is it like to have a pool?
Yeah, that's one of the best visuals
floor?
Is the pool that he kind of wanders around the edge of.
Winds up falling into almost on accident. Something I will also tout about the film is that I think structurally it's quite interesting to see a film that essentially builds itself and almost promises you to see what led to this suicide. Let's see what led to this bank robbery. And yes, sure, you see a lot of anger being built up a little bit here and there, but from the scene where he visits the rich person's home, the next scene we see is the bank robbery.
Yeah.
We have an enormous gap. I feel like we don't even have necessarily like the big Joker moment of like...
At first it promises us, you can see the circumstances that this person lives with, but still, that doesn't explain
I'll go even further. I think what it ultimately says is that what you should be interested in is not what steps he took to get to robbing a bank. What you should be interested in is who is he?
Yeah.
And what was his life like? Because it's not anybody who decides to do this thing.
So my first choice of filmmaker, and the filmmaker that I'm most excited to see their new film on the Croisette, is Joachim Trier, who I think has most recently become best known for The Worst Person in the World. He has a career that's reached back to 2006, and I'm glad that he's really starting to get that spotlight that I think he so deserves. So Joachim Trier is a Danish-born Norwegian filmmaker. His family has worked in film, although Joachim Trier did not become a filmmaker because his parents said that he should. No, he got his start as a filmmaker because he was a champion skateboarder. And he got into filmmaking, filming skateboarding videos, just like Spike Jonze, growing past his skateboarding phase and really got serious about pursuing film, eventually ending up getting his master's degree at the National Film and Television School. And after that, he ended up developing a few films at Sundance. So despite being a distinctly Norwegian, Nordic filmmaker, he has quite a lot of ties to the Anglosphere. What I really want to start this discussion of Trier with is his self-description of himself as a punk rock filmmaker. He thinks of his inspiration not just as the great filmmakers or the great novelists, but he thinks of his films almost as punk albums. And he's referenced heavily Black Flag, Descendants. I hadn't considered before, but looking at his films through that lens, I can kind of see bits and pieces of that punk ethos.
Maybe a bourgeois punk. You know?
A little bit. I would say Worst Person in the World is like what happens when you're punk and you reach 35. Oslo, August 31st is a film that's all about one day in the life of a drug addict. And then Reprise, his 2006 film, is a film about two young novelists. And they might as well be punk rock stars. The film might as well be about a punk band breaking up. And so the three films that I just mentioned are what he calls the Oslo trilogy. Trier has a very distinct vibe to those three films, which is that he is trying to build not just the story of his characters, he's trying to build an a world around them. He's trying to situate them within that city, and he does that through narration. He does that through cutaway sequences. He does that through little bits and pieces that almost feel like footnotes in the grand scheme of that single story. There's a scene in Oslo, August 31st, where the main character sits down at a coffee shop and just listens to other people's conversations. And we start floating between the conversations, getting little bits and pieces of the buzz of the city. And so I think his ambitions are much bigger.
It's impossible to talk about Joachim Trier without acknowledging his go-to co-screenwriter, Eskil Vogt, who's a filmmaker in his own right, filmmaker of Blind, of The Innocents. He's worked and collaborated with Trier on most of them, for sure. And he's going to be on Sentimental Value as well.
And he's the secret sauce behind Reprise, behind Oslo, August 31st.
I don't know what he brings to the table and what Trier brings to the table, but
that's
like,
the great thing about any collaboration.
You were talking about like these little bits of like whether it's narration or I'm assuming they both kind of bounce off each other and just kind of see like, okay, what kind of fun little details can we incorporate that give our story a bit more of a richness in the details. You know?
Yeah, well, I can actually speak a little bit to the intent behind this. Trier is a massive fan of literature. Often when approaching films, he starts to question, why is it that as filmmakers, we're so tied to formal realism. We're so tied to the story happening as the story happens. We can't have any internalization. We have to just play the events out. And what he started to ask himself is, how can I challenge form in a way that novels do? He was reading a book that jumped from one chapter, third person point of view, to the next chapter being a diary entry. Yeah. And he was saying, well, why in cinema can't we do that? And so that's a lot of what he's doing when he uses narration, when he uses these sequences, these cutaways, these moments like the manifesto in Louder Than Bombs. He's thinking, why do we have to make movies that way? Taking from literature, he likes to think of his films as chapters, which is Julie in 12 Chapters is the most language title of The Worst Person in the World. But what he really likes to do is structure those chapters as set pieces, as though it's an action movie. Or he has described them as being different songs on an album. Each chapter sort of acting as a different track. It's got a different feeling, a different tone to it, but it's the same project.
I kind of see that now, actually.
And it's an interesting way to approach.
12 songs and not 12 chapters.
Yeah, Julie in 12 songs.
Yeah.
But that seems pretentious.
I mean, is he not a little bit?
He is. But I think anyone who sort of poses themselves as like a punk rock radical who's going to break the form, they have to have an ego.
And like calling himself a punk rock when you have filmmakers like Radu Jude out there, like it's a little petty. But, you know,
fair enough. Watch Oslo August 31st and it might change your mind.
Let's jump into his first Cannes competition selected
and
film.
First English language film. Louder Than Bombs is the story of a family, and specifically 3 men, in the wake of the death of their matriarch. It's 3 years after the mom of the family died, played by Isabelle Huppert, and she was a war photographer who was always charging into dangerous territory. And so it's kind of ironic that the way that she died was in a car accident just a few miles away from home. And the film follows the 3 men left behind in this family, one being a very troubled teenager, one being a slightly older son, maybe in his mid to late 20s, and one being the widower, the husband, played by Gabriel Byrne, who has been having extramarital affairs. And so we have this sort of family dynamic that changes when the Jesse Eisenberg character comes home for the first time in quite some time to prepare for an exhibition of the late mother's war photography. Something interesting with this film is the title of it is actually taken from an album by the Smiths.
Yes. What's fun about the title is it gives you a certain picture, and I went into the film kind of thinking about that, like what is louder than bombs, or what is the sound of something louder than bombs, and then suddenly you were faced with a film which is like for the most part very quiet. Like the sound mix is surprisingly quiet. The dialogue takes like a very big place in the mix. The sound of this film kept me on edge a little bit. I didn't feel like I was hearing a normal film.
He's very clearly taking from the tradition of Hollywood family dramas. It's very indebted to Robert Redford's Ordinary People. It's very indebted to Woody Allen's entire filmography, but specifically Interiors. And I mean, you can't watch this film and not think of Noah Baumbach's The Squid and the Whale because of the presence of Jesse Eisenberg. I think that's very intentional. It's very interesting to have a Norwegian filmmaker who studied in the UK tackle this very American genre and tackling suburban life in the United States. That's actually where this film falls apart a little bit for me. It feels like he's looking through someone else's lens of what suburban American life is like. For one thing, this is an insanely bourgeois family to be in the American suburbs. But beyond that, there's so much about it and the way that they interact and the way that these characters exist in the world that simply does not feel American, but feels like an imitation of what a Nordic European might view America as.
I can understand your point. I think that lack of authenticity is more at the macro scale. The character-to-character interactions, the emotions that are kind of being garnered, some of the dialogues, especially within the family, that kind of stuff. I felt like there was a lot of truthfulness to that. I can see what you mean in that authenticity thing. I didn't feel that very, very strongly.
But I think that's baked into this type of film. The essential part of it is this American WASP middle class repression that these families have, that they can't speak to each other on the same level because of this inability to share their emotions, which is part of American culture. Again, I feel like it's looking at that through a very outside perspective and maybe also romanticizing it.
Generally speaking, like, even if there are a few things that irked me here and there, I thought that there was an emotional intelligence to the film.
I think at its core, it's about memory, it's about subjectivity, and it's also about very troubled family bonds. And not just the bonds on the surface, but also the memories that we share and the way that we color them and the people that we share them with. And I think that's where the film is the strongest. But it's when it expands out that I'm a little bit wary and thinking, I really think that this could have been stronger if it was kept in Norway and really kept with, especially a film about memory and subjectivity. I would have liked to see that be more personal to the writers.
I saw the film more as like this human-to-human thing, and I saw a lot of truth within the dialogues and within the interactions. Like, I think your critique is valid, and I didn't consider that completely. If you look really at the human-to-human interactions, there's something truthful about that. And I really like the structure of the film too. That's what gives it a little bit of an edge in that it's not a film where the mother dies at the start and it's just these men kind of dealing with it. It's mixed in with a lot of these memories and flashbacks.
And it starts 3 years after too.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not the immediate
Exactly. Medleyed in to like with scenes from the past.
When I see a filmmaker that typically works in one industry and moves over to another industry to make one film, I always have to think, what is the purpose of that? Why did Asghar Farhadi make The Past in France? Why did he make Everybody Knows in Spain?
You know who's a foreign director who made a movie set in New York that also has a dying war photographer? Pedro Almodovar's The Room Next Door.
That's true, and that's another film that I think there's something lost in translation in The Room Next Door. And that's a little bit what I feel here too. I really still feel like these characters I struggle with at times. I feel like the young actor, Devin Druid, his character is so edgy to a point where I find him grating to watch.
Oh yeah.
You know, he's spitting in his teacher's face.
It's a bit too much.
It's a bit too much. And you know, he's sitting on his computer playing Skyrim, Elder
You have a
Scrolls.
scene of the dad coming in like, "Are you winning, son?"
And Jesse Eisenberg's character is a dick to a different extent. I do feel like there's something a little bit lost in the family connections here. Yeah, families fight, but there also has to be moments of recognition, moments of warmth, and I felt that was a little bit missing here. It kind of sucks to go into this challenge and have a filmmaker that I absolutely love and kind of come away lower on a film of theirs. But perhaps the reason why I'm not resonating with it and you are is that it's a different take on this genre that I typically resonate with, and you typically don't.
Did it touch a nerve?
Yeah, it did touch a nerve, if you don't mind me saying so. This guy who's sitting there, not saying anything, just watching. Yeah.
But you were not doing. No, you were just.
Was it like this? Or like this? Or like this?
I don't know, but it was very scary.
Really?
You'll see what we think about sentimental value in the next video coming out tomorrow. So stay tuned for that when we'll be talking on the Croisette.